On our anniversary night, my father-in-law insulted me in front of everyone. When I spoke back, my husband slapped me. So I wiped my tears and made one call. Daddy, please come. The night was supposed to be perfect. Victor had spent 6 months planning our 5th wedding anniversary dinner. 6 months of secret calls to the caterer, of sneaking fabric swatches into the house, of lying awake at 2 a.m. making spreadsheets for floral arrangements. 6 months of loving a man who deep down, I was starting to suspect, did not love me back, not the way a man should love the woman who wore his ring. But I told myself I was wrong. I told myself marriage was work. I told myself the cold silences and the rolled eyes were just stress. He was busy. He was tired. I kept making excuses, the way women do when they have invested everything into something and cannot afford to admit it is broken. The venue was a grand estate outside of Charleston, South Carolina. String lights hung from oak trees draped in Spanish moss. 200 white roses lined the entrance. The guests, nearly 600 of them, family, friends, colleagues, moved through the warm October air in their finest clothes, laughing and clinking glasses. It looked like a dream. I stood near the entrance in my navy gown, my hair pinned up the way my mother used to do it when I was a little girl. I had never felt more beautiful, and I had never felt more alone. My husband, Colonel Derek Hayes, stood across the room with his father. Richard Hayes. Even thinking the name now makes my jaw tighten. Richard Hayes was a retired military man, or so he liked to remind everyone within the first 90 seconds of meeting them. He wore his old rank like a crown. He spoke to waitstaff the way kings spoke to servants. And from the very first day Derek brought me home, Richard Hayes had decided with absolute certainty that I was not good enough for his son. Not because I lacked intelligence. I held a master's degree in international relations and had served 8 years as a naval intelligence officer before transitioning to a senior government advisory role in Washington. I had sat in rooms where decisions were made that altered the course of nations. But to Richard Hayes, none of that mattered, because I had grown up poor, because my father had driven a delivery truck, because my mother had cleaned houses to put me through school, because I had clawed my way up with my bare hands instead of being handed a silver spoon, and Richard Hayes hated people who reminded him that the spoon was never really earned. The evening started quietly enough. Dinner was served, toasts were made. Derek smiled at me from across the table, and for a moment, just a moment, I let myself believe that everything was going to be fine. Then Richard Hayes stood up. He clinked his glass. The crowd went quiet the way crowds do when an older man with a loud voice demands attention. I'd like to say a few words, he announced, buttoning his jacket with the slow deliberateness of a man who believed the world existed to wait for him. I folded my hands in my lap. 5 years, he said. 5 years my son has been married to this woman. He gestured toward me without looking at me, the way you gesture at a piece of furniture. And I'll be honest with you all, I still don't fully understand it. A few uncomfortable laughs from the crowd. Derek said nothing. Derek could have had anyone, Richard continued, his voice warm with the confidence of a man who had never once been told to stop. He had offers, good families, women with breeding, with background, with... Richard, my mother-in-law Carol, touched his arm. He shook her off. I'm just being honest, Carol. The boy married beneath himself, we all know it. Leah is a fine enough woman, I suppose, but she has never quite fit into this family, has she? You can take the girl out of the trailer park. The room went ice cold. I felt 600 pairs of eyes turn toward me. My face burned. My hands trembled under the table. I thought of my mother on her knees scrubbing floors so I could buy textbooks. I thought of my father, coming home at midnight smelling of gasoline and cardboard, kissing my forehead before he collapsed into bed. I thought of every single thing I had sacrificed, every door I had kicked open with my own 2 feet. And I stood up. That is enough. My voice was quiet, controlled, the voice I used in intelligence briefings when the room needed to calm down and listen. The crowd held its breath. You will not speak about my family that way, I said, looking directly at Richard Hayes. Not tonight, not ever again. My parents worked harder than you have ever worked in your entire life, and they did it with dignity, which is more than I can say for what you just did. Richard Hayes stared at me, his face went red. And then, before I could take my next breath, the sound came from my left. Sharp, sudden, flat. A slap. Derek's hand, my face. The impact snapped my head to the side. My earring flew off. I grabbed the table to steady myself. The room erupted, gasps, sharp intakes of breath. A woman somewhere in the back said, "Oh my God." And then, I will never forget this for as long as I live, Richard Hayes laughed. A low, ugly, satisfied laugh. And like a horrible wave, nervous laughter rippled through part of the crowd, the ones who didn't know what else to do, the ones who were too cowardly to react with appropriate horror. I stood there, one hand on the table, the side of my face stinging, 600 people looking at me. I did not cry, I refused to cry. I straightened up, I smoothed the front of my gown. I looked at Derek, really looked at him, and what I saw in his face was not remorse. It was not horror at what he had done. It was a flicker of relief, like he had finally done something his father approved of. That was the moment I stopped loving Derek Hayes. Not in anger, not in rage. In the cold, clean way a door closes when the wind is finally still. I reached up and touched my cheek once. Then I picked up my clutch from the chair, walked through the crowd, which parted for me like water, and stepped out through the tall glass doors onto the terrace. The October night was cool and quiet. Moss swayed in the oak trees. Somewhere in the distance, a river moved through the dark. I wiped my tears, just one set. I allowed myself that much. Then I took out my phone. I scrolled to one name. Dad. It rang twice. Lit Bug, my father's voice, warm and rough like worn leather. James Victor, retired now, 63 years old, still woke up at 5 every morning out of lifelong habit. You okay? Isn't your party going on right now? Dad, I said. One word, that was all. There was a pause, the kind of pause that only exists between a father and a daughter who have spoken a private language their whole lives. Where are you? He asked. His voice had changed, calm, steady. The voice he used when things were serious. I told him the address. Don't move, he said, I'm coming. What I did not know, what I could not have known, was that my father was not coming alone. James Victor had spent 32 years in the United States Army. He had retired as a command sergeant major, the highest non-commissioned rank in the American military. He was the kind of man that younger soldiers described in hushed, reverent tones, not because he was loud or imposing, though he was certainly both when the moment called for it, but because he was the rarest thing in any institution, a man of absolute, unshakable integrity. When my father walked into a room, people noticed. It took him 40 minutes to drive to the estate. I sat on a stone bench in the garden, my heels off, my feet on the cool grass, watching the string lights sway. Inside, the party had awkwardly resumed. Someone had put on music. People were pretending. That is what people do at events like this, they pretend, because acknowledging the truth is too uncomfortable. Derek had not come outside to find me. That told me everything. At 9:47 p.m., a black truck pulled through the estate gates. My father stepped out. He was wearing slacks and a pressed white shirt. He must have changed quickly. Behind him, stepping out of the passenger side, was my uncle Marcus, a retired Marine colonel, and behind Marcus was my cousin Darnell, a current serving Army Ranger on leave. 3 generations of American military men, walking across the gravel in the October night toward the daughter and niece and cousin who had called. I stood up when I saw them. My father reached me first. He put his hands on my face, gently, so gently, and looked at my cheek. His jaw tightened. His eyes, usually so warm, went very still. Who? He said quietly. Dad, leave one word. Derek, I whispered. He nodded once, slowly, the way a mountain shifts. Okay, he said, okay. He did not rage. He did not shout. He smoothed my hair back from my face and kissed my forehead exactly the way he had done when I was 9 years old and the world had been unkind to me. Then he straightened up, turned to Marcus and Darnell and said simply, "Let's go inside." The moment James Victor walked through those glass doors, the room changed. It is difficult to explain to someone who has never witnessed it, the way a room responds to a man of genuine authority, not performed authority, not inherited authority, earned authority, the kind that comes from decades of sacrifice and service and showing up when things were hard. People turned, conversations stopped, the music kept playing, oblivious. My father walked directly across the room toward the table where Derek and Richard Hayes were seated. Derek saw him coming and stood up. He was taller than my father by 3 inches. It did not matter. "Mr. Victor," Derek began. "Sit down, son," my father said. Derek sat down. Richard Hayes remained seated, his glass in his hand, his expression somewhere between confusion and annoyance. He looked my father up and down with the practiced dismissiveness of a man who had spent a lifetime judging people on sight. "And you are?" Richard asked, his tone carrying that particular brand of wealthy condescension. My father looked at him for a long moment. "I am the man," he said, "whose daughter you just watched get struck across the face in front of 600 people, and I am the man who raised her to be worth 10 of anyone in this room." The table went absolutely silent. Richard Hayes opened his mouth. "I'm not finished," my father said, quiet, like steel wrapped in velvet. He turned to Derek. "I welcomed you into my family," he said. "I shook your hand, I trusted you with my child, and tonight you put your hand on her face in public because she defended her mother's honor." He paused. "I need you to understand something clearly, Derek. There are no words, no apology, no explanation that make that acceptable. Not one." Derek's face had gone pale. "Sir, I said I'm not finished." Silence. "I am not here to make a scene," my father continued. "I am not here to embarrass anyone. I am here because my daughter called me, and when my daughter calls me, I come. That is what fathers do, that is what family does." He glanced at Richard Hayes. "Some of us, anyway." He reached into his shirt pocket and placed a business card on the table in front of Derek. On it was the name and number of the best family law attorney in Charleston. My father had clearly made a phone call of his own on the drive over. "My daughter will be leaving with me tonight," he said. "What happens next is between you, your lawyers, and God, but I want you to know something, Derek. The day you raised your hand to Victor, you didn't just lose a wife. You lost the best thing that ever happened to you, and you'll spend the rest of your life knowing it." He straightened his cuffs. He turned back toward me. 600 people were watching in total silence. My father walked across the room, took my hand, and led me toward the door. Uncle Marcus fell into step on my left, Darnell on my right. At the doorway, I stopped. I turned back one last time. I looked at Derek, who was staring at the business card on the table, his father's hand on his shoulder, both of them looking smaller than I had ever seen them. I did not say anything. I did not need to. I turned back around and walked out into the October night. 3 months later, the divorce was finalized. Derek did not contest it. I think, somewhere under all the ego and the conditioning and the fear of his father, there was a part of him that knew, that had always known. Richard Hayes, for his part, attempted to give a statement to a local society blog about the unfortunate end of the marriage. The blog did not publish it. Apparently the editor had been one of the 600 guests at the party. I moved back to Washington. I returned to work. I sat in rooms where decisions were made that altered the course of nations, and I did it with my head high and my shoulders back, the way my father had always taught me. My mother called me every Sunday morning. My father drove up to visit me once a month, always arriving with a container of her pot roast and a bag of books he thought I might like. We would sit at my kitchen table and eat and talk and sometimes say nothing at all, which is its own kind of grace. I was 38 years old, newly single, and, for the first time in years, completely, deeply free. One evening, about 4 months after the divorce, I was sitting at my desk finishing a briefing document when my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "I heard what happened. I've always thought you were extraordinary. I hope you're doing well. Nathaniel Crawford, we met at the conference in Annapolis, 2019. I stared at the message for a moment. Then I smiled. I remembered Nathaniel Crawford, tall. Former Army intelligence, now running a private security consultancy. Sharp mind, kind eyes, had argued with me passionately about geopolitical strategy for 45 minutes at a cocktail reception, and then apologized afterward for being too intense. I had liked him immediately, and then gone home to my husband and never thought of him again. I thought of him now. I picked up my phone and typed back. "I'm doing better than I've been in years. Thank you for reaching out." He replied in 30 seconds. "Would you like to get coffee sometime? or dinner if you're feeling bold. I laughed out loud in my quiet apartment, an actual laugh, surprised and warm and real. I typed dinner, I've always been bold. And I put the phone down and looked out at the Washington skyline, the city lit up against the dark, full of possibility and noise and the endless human business of starting over. My father had once told me when I was very young that the bravest thing a person could do was not fight their enemy. The bravest thing was to walk away from everything that was diminishing them and choose, every single day, to build something better. I had been a naval intelligence officer. I had served my country. I had survived Richard Hayes and Derek Hayes and 600 witnesses and a slap that was meant to silence me. It had not silenced me. It had set me free. And as I sat in my Washington apartment on that quiet evening, with a new message on my phone and my mother's voice still warm in my memory, and my father's lessons stitched into my bones, I knew with absolute certainty that the best chapter of my life had not yet been written. It was just beginning. Share this story if you believe a strong woman never stays where she is not valued. Comment Dad if you have a father who would move mountains for you. Subscribe for more stories of strength, courage and second chances.